All right, let's dive straight into an ancient text today, specifically focusing on the very first chapter of the book of Romans.
Okay. And this chapter really kicks off with the author Paul setting the stage immediately. He identifies himself right up front as a servant of Christ Jesus, called, specifically called to be an apostle and set apart for what he calls the gospel of God.
The gospel. So that's the core idea right from the start. And according to this text, this isn't presented as something brand new.
No, not at all. It's framed as the good news God promised long beforehand through his prophets, recorded in what it calls the Holy Scriptures.
And the absolute heart of this gospel message, as laid out here.
It's God's Son, Jesus Christ. The text gives, well, two key identifiers for him.
Which are?
First, regarding his human nature, he's a descendant of David. That's clear.
Okay.
And second, and this is crucial, through the Spirit of holiness, he was declared powerfully to be the Son of God by his resurrection from the dead.
Got it. So our mission then in this deep dive is to really unpack this opening chapter. We want to, pull out the key themes, see how Paul's thought progresses.
And really understand what he's communicating here about the gospel, about faith, and, well, about humanity's condition, all based strictly on what's in this source.
Exactly. Looking at the map this chapter provides.
And Paul quickly connects his bigger mission to the actual people in Rome. He explains that it's through Christ and for his name's sake that he and others received grace and this apostleship.
And the purpose of that.
To call people from among all the Gentiles, the non-Jewish peoples, to what the text calls the obedience that comes from faith.
And he loops the Romans right into that, doesn't he?
Directly. He says, and you also are among those called to belong to Jesus Christ. He even expresses real gratitude for them.
Saying their faith is known everywhere.
Yeah, reported all over the world is the phrase used. It shows their significance.
And there's a personal element, too, even though he hadn't met many of them yet.
Oh, definitely. He mentions God as his witness, that he's constantly praying for them, always hoping for a chance, if it's God's will, to finally get to Rome.
And it's not just a casual visit he wants. He lays out a reason.
Right. He longs to visit so he can impart some spiritual gift to strengthen them.
But it's framed as a two-way street, isn't it?
Absolutely. For mutual encouragement, so that he and they can be encouraged by each other's faith. It's very much presented as a shared thing.
He mentions he's been blocked before, his plans hindered.
Yes, but the desire remains strong. He wants to have a harvest among them, just like he apparently has among other Gentiles. It underlines that missionary aspect described here.
And this strong sense of obligation comes through.
Very strong. He says he's obligated, indebted, you could say, to preach this gospel to everyone.
Everyone meaning?
Greeks and non-Greeks, the wise and the foolish, as the culture categorized them then. Which explains why he's so eager to preach in Rome itself, the center of it all.
And this drive leads right into a really powerful statement about the gospel.
Yeah, his core declaration here. I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes.
That's a major claim. Power for salvation.
Yeah.
And he specifies an order.
He does. First for the Jew, then for the Gentile. And it's in this gospel, he says, that something specific is revealed.
Which is?
A righteousness from God. That's the term used.
A righteousness from God. Okay, and how does that work?
The text immediately explains it's revealed by faith from first to last. It's all about faith.
And he backs this up.
Yep, links it straight to a quote, "The righteous will live by faith." So the source connects the gospel's saving power directly to this righteousness that comes from God and is accessed through faith.
Okay, so that's one side clearly presented. Gospel, power, God's righteousness, salvation through faith. But the chapter takes a sharp turn, doesn't it?
It really does, a stark contrast. It pivots to talk about something else being revealed.
Which is?
The wrath of God. Revealed from heaven, it says, against all the godlessness and wickedness of people.
Specifically people who do what?
People who suppress the truth by their wickedness. So the text presents both God's salvation and his wrath as active revelations.
And it argues why this wrath is, well, justified in its view.
Yes, it claims people are without excuse. Why? Because what may be known about God is plain to them.
How is it plain?
Because God has made it plain to them. That's the assertion.
Does it give specifics on how God made it plain?
It does. It argues that since the world's creation, God's invisible qualities, it names his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen.
Understood.
Even
Understood from what?
from what has been made. The claim is that creation itself is the evidence.
So according to this source, the root problem isn't that people don't know God exists.
Exactly. The text states, although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. That's the crucial turning point described.
And there are consequences to that described in the text.
Yes, consequences for their inner state first. It says their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened.
Futile thinking, darkened hearts. And it mentions wisdom.
It does. It claims, although they claimed to be wise, they became fools.
And this internal shift, does it lead to external actions, according to the text?
Directly. It says they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles, which is, the text's description of idolatry.
Replacing the creator with created things.
Precisely. And this is where a key phrase comes in, repeated several times.
Which
God gave them over. It's presented as a consequence.
Okay, the first instance.
Linked to their sinful desires. Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another.
And the text explicitly connects this back to that earlier exchange.
Yes, because they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator. The link is made very clear.
And this gave them over idea continues.
It does. The text states, because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. It then gives specific examples.
Such as?
It says, even their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural ones.
Okay, presenting that as one outcome. What else?
It continues, in the same way the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another.
And it elaborates on that.
Yes, it says, men committed indecent acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their perversion. This is presented quite directly as part of this consequence sequence in the source.
And there's another gave them over, a fourth instance described.
Yes, and this one is tied explicitly back to their thinking about God. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind.
A depraved mind, leading to so that they do what ought not to be done, things considered improper.
And does it list what kinds of things result from this depraved mind?
Oh, it gives quite a detailed list. It says they become filled with all sorts of things.
Like what? Give us a sense. Well, things like every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity.
Wow.
Being full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. It also includes being gossips, slanderers, God-haters.
It keeps going.
Yes. Insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They are senseless, faithless, heartless, ruthless. It's a pretty comprehensive description from the text perspective.
A grim picture of the outcome of being given over, as the text puts it.
Indeed. And the chapter wraps up this whole section with a really striking point.
What's that?
The text claims that these people know God's righteous decree. They know, it says, that those who do such things deserve death.
And yet?
And yet, they not only keep doing them, but they also approve of those who practice them. That adds, well, another layer entirely to the condition being described.
So if we step back and look at the path this chapter takes.
Right, you see Paul introducing himself, his mission, the core message, this powerful gospel, salvation by faith, righteousness from God.
And then immediately setting that against this detailed account of, well, what the text portrays as humanity's turn away from God.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Suppressing truth, rejecting the knowledge of God that it claims is obvious in creation, leading to darkened minds, futile thinking, idolatry.
Which then, according to the text's argument, results in God giving them over to various forms of impurity, lust, and this whole list of wicked behaviors.
All while the text claims having some knowledge of the consequences. It's a very tightly woven argument presented in this ancient writing.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
And that brings our exploration of Romans chapter 1 to a close for now. We've walked through Paul's introduction, the declaration about the gospel and faith.
And then that stark contrast, the text description of humanity turning from God and the consequences that follow according to this source.
So, reflecting on this deep dive, what does this exploration prompt you, the listener, to consider about the specific perspectives presented here? Ideas about faith, knowledge of God, human nature, and consequences as this source sees them.
Yeah, and maybe a specific thought to take away. Based on the chapter's own structure, think about that progression laid out in the text.
The progression from knowing God but not honoring him.
To futile thinking, darkened hearts, idolatry.
And then this repeated concept of being given over to certain behaviors and that depraved mind.
What might that sequence, as described in this text, suggest about how it views the connection, the interplay between someone's internal state regarding God and their external actions and character?